morning, beautiful people. It is great to be with you all. Hope that you're all doing well. Let's read our text today, 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. 1 Peter 5, 6 and 7, if you'll read with me. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. If you got your Bibles, go ahead and turn me to 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings 19. And as you're doing that, I wonder, how many Bibles do we have? How many Bibles are there? What a great sight. 1 Kings chapter 19. As you're turning there, I want to set up the scene of what all's led up to this point. Elijah has just finished the mountaintop experience that was Mount Carmel. If you're familiar with the story, you'll notice that, you'll remember that Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to a trial by fire, quite literally, there on Mount Carmel. And the whole purpose was to establish who was God. Was it Baal or was it God? Was it Yahweh? And so both camps, the prophets of Baal and Elijah, set up altars and were to call upon their preferred deity. And the God that answered by fire was to be declared as God. You might remember that the prophets of Baal spent a lot of time marching around their altar to be answered by silence. But Elijah gets up and makes a big show of putting water all over the altar just to make it clear that this wasn't spontaneous combustion. He then prays to God and is answered by fire, a true mountaintop experience where God not only listened to his prayer, but answered his prayer in a very visible, immediate way that everybody was able to see exactly what had taken place. To make it even better, he goes up to another mountaintop where he will pray, asking God to send rain when rain had not been on that particular land for a number of years. And again, he's answered by God in another mountaintop experience in a very visible way where God listens to him and shows, not only am I God, but I listen to you and I will do what you have asked. That is what takes place immediately before chapter 19, beginning in verse 1. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, that belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind on an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in a cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, only am left. And they seek to take my life, to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Mohal, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the Lord who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." I want you to notice again verse 4. "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough, O Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my father's." Can you hear the exasperation in Elijah's voice? Can you hear the desperation in his voice? Can you hear how overwhelmed he must have felt in that particular moment that he arrives at a place where he says, "I'm just done. I can't handle anymore." Where he arrives at a place where he says, "That which I have been carrying is too much for me to carry anymore. I can't carry this load a step further. Just take it away from me." If we were to go around this room today, all of us could recount at some point in our lives where we felt just completely overwhelmed. Maybe it was when we looked at society around us and we said we're overwhelmed by everything going on. Maybe it was because of the challenges we face in our own personal life. Maybe it was a financial challenge. Maybe it was somebody was sick. Maybe somebody had died or we thought they were going to die. Whatever the case might be, we can all relate to times where we just felt overwhelmed and burdened. What is interesting about 1 Kings 19 is not only that we can relate to how Elijah felt, but 1 Kings chapter 19 relates how God himself ministered to Elijah. The steps that he laid forth for him to take, even in the midst of feeling completely overwhelmed and ready to just give up. And if what God presents for Elijah was good enough for him, then maybe it presents a pattern how we too can move through those times when we feel despair, depression, anxiety, or just completely overwhelmed. So today I want us to look at how we might follow what is set forth here by God himself as he ministers to Elijah. And the first thing that I want you to notice is what God doesn't say. He doesn't say, "You shouldn't feel like this." Sometimes we kind of try and tell ourselves that. We find ourselves in the midst of feeling some kind of way, or we see other Christians, and sometimes we feel the need to be really spiritual, and we're asked, "Hey, how are you doing today?" "I'm doing great. I got everything to be thankful for," and that's true. But God never looked at Elijah and said, "Why do you feel this way? You shouldn't feel that way." Instead, he engages Elijah where he's at and helps him move through it. Brene Brown is a shame researcher. And in her book, The Blessings of Imperfection, she talks about this dig deeply, the idea of how we move through challenging times. And she's going to use the acronym DIG to present some ideas of how to do that. And I think it presents a pretty good framework of how to understand how God moves with Elijah and what he presents to him so that he might move through those times as well. The first thing that we want to notice is that when we find ourselves feeling overwhelmed, that we want to be deliberate. Notice verses 5 through 11. "And he," that is Elijah, "lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.' And he looked, and behold, there was a head of cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came to him again a second time and touched him and said, 'Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you.' He arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he sat in a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to Elijah, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' And he said, 'I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek to take my life away.' And he said, 'Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by. And a great and strong wind tore mountains and broke in pieces the rocks of the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake." And we'll continue on to verse 12. "And after the earthquake was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire was a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in a cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a great voice and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" I remember getting my first mountain bike. It was a big deal because it didn't have training wheels. I remember getting my first mountain bike, and my parents had made a deal with me that if I would save up my allowance, and I would save up for half of that bike, then they would pay the other half. Now that doesn't sound like too big a deal until you know that my allowance was 50 cents a week. That bike was $40. Do you know how long it takes to save up 50 cents and get $20? In the mind of a little kid, it takes an eternity. Yes, some of you did the math in your head and realized that it's okay. Yes, but for a kid's perspective, it takes an eternity. You know what the worst part was? Going to Walmart. It wasn't because I got to see the bikes. It was the checkout line. Have you noticed that they put candy bars at a perfect height for little kids to look at and see? And so I went through this process every time I was there in the checkout line of, man, that candy bar looks good. But that candy bar is $2.50. That's 5 weeks. 5 weeks of my life. Do I really want to buy the candy bar? Do I want to buy? You get the general idea. And so on this went over and over again. And I'm appreciative of that process because it taught me the value of money. Why do we want kids to learn the value of money? Because you can't spend what you don't have without being in trouble, right? Did you know the same thing works when you feel overwhelmed? That when you feel overwhelmed, you have a limited amount of resources, emotional, mental, sometimes physical, certainly a level of energy. You have a limited amount of resources to use when you feel overwhelmed, so it is important to use them well, lest you use more than you have and find yourself in a worse of a predicament than when you started. Notice that God doesn't immediately begin with Elijah by immediately beginning a conversation. Instead, he meets Elijah where he is and says, the journey's too much for you right now, both the physical and the spiritual journey, if you will. It's too much for you right now. Instead, just stay here for a minute. Elijah is going to be provided with food. He's going to be provided with water. He's going to be provided with rest. If you find yourself overwhelmed, the most important thing you can do at that moment is, have I had enough to eat? The world can look a lot better when your stomach's full, lest we become like a Snickers commercial and be a little hangry. To make sure we've had enough to eat, make sure we've had adequate rest, to make sure we've had enough to drink so that we have the energy to process what's going on around us. To be deliberate with how we use the energy that we have. But not only should we tend to the physical needs that we have, the food, water, rest, but the very first thing we should ask is, where is God in the midst of this? For notice that God is going to lead Elijah to the place where exactly he is, and he still hasn't begun a conversation yet. It's just, this is where God is. In fact, the entire narrative seems to emphasize that God had never abandoned Elijah, but that remained present with Elijah. The entire narrative seems to be about God bringing Elijah to a place where they can have a conversation, which first began with that Elijah hadn't been abandoned. For where was God in the midst of everything Elijah was facing? Where was God in the midst of feelings like, there's just so much going on? Where was God in the midst of the feelings of, man, I just wish it was all over? And the whole point is that God was still right there. I think about those miracles that we sometimes talk about of Jesus calming the storm. And he does it twice. One time he walks on water and gets into a boat. The other time he's already asleep in the boat. But in both times the wind ceases. And in both times all of the apostles are asking the question, where is God, or who is this, or why are we in this predicament? But where was God in the midst of the storm? Where was Jesus in the midst of the storm? Each time he was right there. The challenge wasn't that he wasn't there. It's just in the midst of the challenges of the storm, in the midst of feeling overwhelmed, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to see him because we feel like there's so much going on. The first step of trying to move through being overwhelmed is to be deliberate, to make sure that we have enough energy to think about things going around us, and to take a moment to ask the question or remind ourselves of where God is. The second step is to be inspired. I want you to notice verses 14 through 18. He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left. And they seek my life to take it away. And the Lord said to him, go, return your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king of Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Mohal you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. I'm hoping everybody here knows what a record player is. If you do, you know it just kind of goes around and around and around. Do you know what happens if it gets scratched? It just keeps saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over. So if you've ever heard the term broken record, it's, well, you keep saying the same thing over and over again. All of us have this little record player in our head. We say the same things to ourselves over and over and over and over again. Sometimes they're really positive of, I look great, I can do this. Sometimes they're not so positive of, man, I'm alone, nobody likes me. But whatever the message is, we tend to play it over and over and over and over again in our head. And the second thing we want to do after we've been deliberate and check to see if we have energy and try to make sure we have energy, in those times when we're feeling overwhelmed, have you noticed that sometimes we play those messages more often on repeat? In those times we're feeling overwhelmed, we want to begin by asking the question, what are the messages that I'm telling myself? And are they valid messages or not? Now, by valid, I don't mean that they don't feel real. In the midst of feeling overwhelmed, the things that we tell ourselves feel real. What we want to evaluate is, do they represent reality as it is or simply reality as we perceive it? Notice some of the things that Elijah had been telling himself. And verses 2 and 3. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as one of them by this time tomorrow morning. Pause. It's a way the ancients would try and say, I promise this is going to happen with every fiber of my being. And they did it by essentially saying, may the gods do to me. That if I don't do what I said, then these gods are going to do this to me. Now think about that for just a minute. Remember how we started? We said that this whole episode begins with Elijah on Mount Carmel challenging the gods. And what did Baal do? Nothing. She's saying that these gods, may they do, by the way, they don't do anything. May they who did nothing do something to me, and yet Elijah is terrified by it. And he says they're trying to seek my life and are ready to seek my life, even though God had protected him just a few days before. Notice there in verse 4, it is enough, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. I'm no better than all the ones who didn't listen before. I'm no better than all of my fathers who tried to kill the prophets. Really, Elijah? The one who God answered with fire? The one who stood up when nobody else would stand up? You're no better than everybody else? Really? But really we kind of get to what he's really trying to say. In verse 9, there he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the Lord came to him and said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left. But God, there's nobody else. It's just me. Now notice that God doesn't chastise him for any of those perspectives. He does come and ask, what are you doing here? But I don't think that was a, what are you doing here, Elijah? You're welcome, you're awake now. But more of a, Elijah, why are you here? What's going on? What are you doing here? It wasn't a chastisement, but more of a question to engage in a conversation of what's going on that's led you to this place. And then God begins to help him to evaluate whether how he perceived reality was a true representation of reality. We want to begin by evaluating what are the messages that I'm telling myself and ask, do these really represent reality, so that we can move to a place where we listen to what God tells us. You guys know that some of my favorite movies are Lord of the Rings movies. And there's one particular scene there towards the end of the Two Towers where Frodo is just ready to give up. In fact, he basically asks, why are we doing this, Sam? And if you remember, it's one of those cinematic moments that just lives on for forever. As Sam answers and says, we keep moving on because we know that there's some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. The purpose of that statement was to give Frodo some reason, some inspiration to take one more step forward. And so we come to God asking, are the messages in my head correct? So that we might listen to what he has to say, to be inspired to take one step further. For notice what he's been saying to Elijah all along. For Elijah says, I'm no better than my fathers. I'm not needed anymore. And yet God's going to give him, I need you to do this, I need you to do this, I need you to do this. That you are needed. I'm all alone. There's nobody left. And God's going to say, well, one, I've been here the whole time. I sent my angel to take care of you. I'm here with you. But not only am I here with you, notice verse 18, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, and all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. That Elijah, I know you feel like you're alone, but that's not true. I know you feel like you don't have anybody in your corner, but that's not true. That you are not alone, that you are loved, that you are needed. In the midst of feeling overwhelmed, we come to our God, we come to his word, we come to him in prayer. We come to other Christians that we know we can trust and that who are our brothers and sisters, who we know have our back, and we say, here are the messages that I'm telling myself. Here's the story that I'm making up in my head about the way reality is. Is this true? We do that so that then we might be inspired with what he has said that is true. For he said that I will never leave you nor forsake you. But those times when we feel completely by ourselves and overwhelmed, we're not by ourselves. He's told us that we are the body of Christ. That every member has a gift that is necessary to the body, that you are needed. And in Romans, we're told that what can separate us from the love of God? Tribulation, or nakedness, or sword. No, in all these things I say that we are more than conquerors. Not only are we needed, not only are we not alone, but we are loved. And in the midst of those times when we feel overwhelmed, we come back to his word to be reminded of what is true so that we can put one foot in front of another and keep moving forward. And then lastly, we go. Notice verse 19. So he, that is Elijah, departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him. And he was the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. The point of coming to God, to evaluate, to be deliberate, to see if we have the energy and see what is necessary and find what is necessary, to be able to find inspiration by evaluating the messages we've been telling ourselves. It's so that we can arrive at a place where we go to put one foot in front of another and then actually do it. Now that sometimes leads to a challenge. For sometimes in the midst of feeling overwhelmed, when we realize something that we are supposed to do, man, it just seems like one more thing to do. Or we build up in our mind, man, how am I supposed to do that? For we want to come to a place where we recognize this is what God would have me to do, but then how am I supposed to do it? Atomic Habits has become one of my favorite books because he breaks down how to go about change within life in such a way that I think is easy to wrap my head around. And that is a 1% change. That when we go to make a change within our life, when we go to do what we know that God is asking us to do, when we go to do that which we know is right to do, sometimes it feels completely overwhelming. And we wonder, what can I do now? What would be a 1% change? When we know what God is asking us to do, even when we find ourselves overwhelmed, what would it look like to do that in a 1% increment? You might say, well, that's not very much. That's okay. 1% is more than what you're doing now. 1% is better than 0%. What is a 1% change? To put one foot in front of another so that we can do what our God has called us to do and move through those times when we feel overwhelmed. Charlotte Elliott wrote a very well-known song. She wrote it when she found herself feeling overwhelmed and worthless. She'd been an invalid for most of her life. And it had left her, especially from a spiritual standpoint, finding herself wondering if she could even do anything, if she was even worth anything. It was on this particular day that she was struck with some truths and decided to write a song about those truths, a song that would echo throughout time, just as I am. Just as I am, without one plea. That even in those times we find ourselves feeling overwhelmed, maybe finding ourselves feeling just a little bit on the worthless side, that we know that our God does love us, value us, want us to follow him, but that he accepts us where we are to try and help us move forward to where he wants us to be. And so in those times we find ourselves feeling dark, overwhelmed, we look to dig out of despair so that we might put one foot in front of the other to come to the one who loves us most. Perhaps you're here today and you want to begin a relationship with the one who does love you most, the one who sacrificed everything that you might have a relationship with him, and that relationship begins at baptism. Or perhaps you're here today and you just need the prayers of the church. If there's any way we can assist you, won't you come as together we stand and sing.